Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Thrive Innovation Series here in Silicon Valley. I'm John Hartnett, CEO and founder of SVG Ventures and Thrive, and we're an innovation and investment platform advancing the future of food and agriculture through innovation. And I'm delighted to be joined here today by an incredible panel from Japan, Silicon Valley, Colorado via the UK, and Washington State for the autonomous Acre and robotics in the 21st century. Welcome, folks. Maybe the next slide there, Jess. You can follow us today on social media. You can also join in the conversation in terms of our discussion. So please tweet and share any interesting topics or snippets you're going to get today. Our next slide. The Thrive Innovation Series, we focused on the webinar series on the future of the food supply chain from field to fork. As well as addressing the challenges of feeding a growing population in a sustainable way and dealing with climate change and the impact of this global pandemic that we're all going through. And we've been discussing key trends, technologies, and solutions from across the agri-food sector, from top CEOs, innovators, entrepreneurs, and investors. And we've got a great lineup today, and then on October 29th, we have a great panel on innovation and disruption with leaders from Impossible Foods, AeroFarms, and Wells Fargo. And then on November 6th, we'll have Wilbur Ellis, CEO, and Mike Wilbur from Cavallo Ventures as well. They're celebrating their 100th year in business. So really good to kind of tune into that on November 5th. Maybe next slide. Our Thrive Accelerator was voted #1 accelerator in the world last year at the World Agri-Food Summit by AgFunder. And we've had incredible success stories. Great companies come through our program over the last 6 years. And these companies combined have created almost 1 billion in value. And we're delighted to see their success. And Eric on our panel today is one of our stars from Thrive alumni. The next slide, we just launched Thrive 7. Our Thrive 7 program just opened a couple of weeks ago for application. So I'd encourage any entrepreneurs from around the world, if you're interested in participating on the #1 program, please join us and put your application as soon as possible. We'll be closing the deadline on November 20th. And we also launched our Thrive Global Initiative. A lot of what we're doing in the food and agriculture space has a meaningful impact to the world and the planet and the soil. And we focused on goals around the USDA goals on the innovation agenda, as well as the UN goals on the sustainability development goals. And we're delighted to be able to partner to drill down in a couple of other key geographies. We launched our Thrive Africa program a couple of weeks ago, our Thrive Australia and Thrive Canada. And we're obviously going to be going to new locations over the next couple of months. Next slide, Jess. I'd like to thank our corporate partners. These are some of the biggest names in the industry. Obviously, 2 of them are here today, Yamaha and Kubota. And we're delighted to be able to work with them to accelerate their innovation and help in terms of their growth strategies. And if you're interested in becoming a partner or getting involved in any of our programs, you can either email us, here at thrive@svgventures.com, or you can visit our website at thriveagrifood.com. So next slide, we have quite an international audience today. I think we've got 41% of our audience from outside the US, from 55 countries, and almost 60% from the US across about 35 states. So quite a broad reach, and we're obviously seeing some leadership from various different corporations, as well as key startup companies, both early stage startup companies, as well as obviously various different agri-food and ag industry players. So welcome everybody to today's event. Next slide, Jess. We're going to run a live poll today. Please, you'll see it, pop up here. Please, do your voting now. There's a couple of questions. You just need to scroll up from the questions number 1, 2, and 3. And please start voting or submitting them now, and then we'll get to those towards the end of our conversation. And next slide, Jess. You can also join in the conversation as part of our Q&A. We'll open it up to the audience for questions. Always very interested to hear, you know, interest from around the world in terms of what we're discussing here today. So you can also upvote somebody if you like somebody else's question, or you want to get up to the top. Please upvote on the Q&A. So next slide, Jess. So great panel here today. Obviously, two of the leading Japanese corporations in the world, Yamaha and Yamaha Motor Ventures and Kubota, and Koji is heading up the innovation center here in Silicon Valley, but he's in Japan right now. And also we've got two of the leading robotic companies in the world here today, both Tortuga AgTech and Abundant Robotics. So really delighted to have everybody here. And maybe to kick us off, I'm gonna ask Dan to give a little overview in terms of Abundant Robotics and what they're up to, and we'll follow that then by Eric. So I'll hand it over to Dan.
Yeah, thanks, John. Dan Steere, CEO of Abundant Robotics. We're located in Hayward, California, so middle of Silicon Valley. The mission for our company is to automate orchard agriculture. And our first product is, you see in the video here, is an automated apple harvester. So this is a system that's driving itself down an orchard row. In real time, it's recognizing fruit, deciding if they're ripe, and then picks the ripe ones, and then deposits them into the large bins that growers use to store and transport their fruit. We're currently conducting small-scale commercial trials. So what you see here is a pre-production prototype. Earlier this year, we were in New Zealand for the Southern Hemisphere harvest season. Right now, I'm in the state of Washington for the U.S. harvest season. We're seeing great results, and so based on these trials, we're anticipating taking the next step and moving into manufacturing soon. So exciting days for our team. The other thing I'd say about us, we're a typical venture capital-backed startup. Our largest investor is Google Ventures, and other investors include Yamaha Motors and Kubota Corporation, so both Nolan and Koji. That's the background for us, John.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan. Eric?
Great. Yep, I'm Eric Adamson, the CEO and co-founder of Tortuga AgTech, and we have also a short video. This is perhaps unsurprisingly very old footage. We sort of stay a little bit behind in where we are today, but we are building strawberry harvesting robots, and we're particularly focused on large-scale kind of tabletop, what they call tabletop farms. So as you can see here, the plants are sort of hanging in free space. We have a commercial fleet. We're scaling into our first commercial contract now. Of course, it's as Dan mentioned, starts small, and then next year we're planning on building a significantly larger fleet and scaling into the contracts that we have. So I think similar to Abundant Robotics, we are a venture-backed company, slightly different investor base, maybe a little earlier stage, but nonetheless, kind of attacking the problem in the same way, which is to say, trying to solve a very big problem for a very large number of growers, and try to solve one of their largest line item costs. So that's us. Just a few quick clips of what we do, and more eager to get into the discussion. Excellent.
Thanks, Eric. And hopefully you'll be able to keep awake here. I know you came back from the UK and hit Los Gatos and then over to Colorado. So great to have you here. Koji?
Okay, thank you, John. So hello, everyone. I am Koji Hasegawa, General Manager of Kubota Innovation Center, Silicon Valley. Let me briefly introduce Kubota business and our activities as Innovation Center. So Kubota is a global company headquartered in Osaka, Japan. And our vision is to create a sustainable society with food, water, and the environment as its business domains, and as a brand statement of for Earth, for life. Next, please. Okay. We have two main business domains, which are food and water and environment. And agricultural machinery is our core business as Kubota. Next, please. In order to respond to the changes in customers' needs and rapid evolution of advanced technologies, Kubota established its innovation center in 2019 to create new value, business and services through open innovation with startups and other partners. Next, please. Investment to startups, their business expansion and growth support, and the creation of new business with startups are the basis of our open innovation activities. Next, please. Our innovation center has its bases in Japan, EU, and the United States at this point. As John mentioned that as general manager of Silicon Valley base, I'm working to create end-to-end solutions in agriculture, mainly in specialty crop segment like fruits and vegetables. I am still based in Japan due to this COVID-19 pandemic, but I hope to move there soon to accelerate our activities. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Koji. And Nolan.
Thank you, John. So Nolan Paul, my partner here at YMV. We're a venture group that's been investing on behalf of our parent company for the last 5 years. We invest in a number of sectors, including mobility, health and wellness, and food and ag. I'm the partner leading up our food and ag investments. We've made, depending how you count, about 7 or 8 investments in the food and ag space. Almost all of them have been to date in specialty crops. A lot of that has to do with just the ethos of us as a company. We focus on really quality at scale, and we're never usually the cheapest of anything, but we really try to focus on quality. And so we've gravitated to start to high quality crop, high value crops. We've invested in a number of ag robotics companies, and over the last year and a half, have been investing more on the data side as well, both in field and post harvest. We also look at seafood and have had a expanding focus on supply chain and downstream technologies. We have a global mandate and have made several investments outside the US and have been working with Thrive for a number of years.
Great. Thank you, Nolan. And maybe just to kick us off, obviously robotics automation is our discussion today, but robotics without intelligence or software platform is a dumb machine. And I know these guys are certainly not building dumb machines. They're very intelligent. And in terms of the platforms, obviously, there's quite a number of different robotic solutions out there today. Are we going to see like several different platforms, or do you think somebody like a Google will come in and be the big dominant platform, or one of your platforms going to take the lead? Maybe I'll hand that to Eric, maybe to kick us off on that one.
Sure. Thanks, John. Well, I think there's a recent announcement that Google is trying to build a data platform. I think that, the Google X project just was announced a couple days ago. I think where we see the market evolving is there are different types of crops that are maybe more physically or agronomically similar. And if you can create a robotic platform that also collects data for a subset of crops, you can create a business that is big enough to be venture scalable in a significant company. I think it'll be hard to create a platform in the hardware sense or the software sense that spans across all types of crops, all types of even specialty crops or row crops, just because the demands on the grower themselves are different. And so, with trying to create a product that is solving all solutions for everyone will likely have a lot of deficiencies. That's sort of our take. But I think there will be a number of platforms that emerge that can address the needs of a number of different industries, or let's say, crop types and markets that are maybe very similar.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I saw the Google Mineral, I think was the platform code name. So it'll be interesting to see how that comes about. Dan, I'd love to get your thoughts on this one here as well. And yeah. I
almost know Zoom well enough to take myself off mute before I start talking. Actually, I think a lot of this is not so relevant for the task at hand for us, because intelligent automation, implies. I mean, it's not intelligent automation if it isn't intelligent. But everything we do has to be accomplished in a very hyper-local way. We can't rely on distributed intelligence or distributed networks. When we put a machine into an orchard anywhere in the world, that machine really needs to be capable of doing everything it needs to do. All the artificial intelligence to recognize fruit, ripeness, and understand the things about the canopy that we need to know in order to harvest efficiently, et cetera. I mean, there's a lot of intelligent capability built into these systems, but it all has to reside locally. And so, first of all, I think that's going to be true of most of the systems that are in agriculture, particularly ones that are doing the kinds of things that Eric and I are taking on, where you're talking about harvest tasks, manipulation, these sorts of things, because there's just not time or bandwidth or really kind of appropriate configuration for you to rely on some sort of distributed network. So for us, just like everyone else, the kind of cloud services that you're talking about are it's a good tool, it's good infrastructure, but it's really sort of a secondary tool to the capabilities you need to bring intelligent automation into most agricultural settings, particularly the kind of stuff that is interacting with a crop, versus using GPS to drive through a field.
Yeah. Nolan, Koji, any views on this one here?
Yeah, I have some opinion about this. So even with having intelligence or digital platform, I think each process can be mechanized and automated by robots, and it can contribute to labor and manpower savings, which are very big concerns for farmers now. On the other hand, having data platform can connect the entire agriculture process and make it more effective and efficient. For example, the data collected by harvesting robots may be able to be utilized in the upstream process to improve yields and reduce costs. So therefore, for realizing sustainable agriculture, we expect to have more platform in this field as well. And since the one who controls big data can become the key player in this field, it is also possible that players from other industries who has a very strength in data management will take control. And this is what we are actually really afraid of.
Thanks, Koji. Nolan?
I just would echo what Eric said. I mean, on the hardware side, I think we see it that the architecture of the crops will dictate a lot of the structure of the hardware. And we see, there's some pretty common themes, whether we're talking about an orchard crop, a vine crop, or a row crop. And then on the compute side, we've seen people have a bit more scale, and we've seen large companies come to this space, and startups get a lot of traction.
Obviously, I know here, certainly in California, the whole labor issue has become, quite a crisis in terms of availability of labor, and many of the big produce companies are, really screaming out for automation, and there's a lot of solutions that are out there. In terms of, scaling, these companies, it'd be really interesting to kind of hear from Dan and Eric in terms of, what do you see as what it takes to scale, your company today? Obviously, this is a complex machine. It's hardware, it's software. You're in a field, not in a factory. Just really to kind of get your sense in terms of how, you see, yourself scaling, maybe, Eric.
Sure. I think for any company trying to do this kind of thing, there's 3 tiers of challenges. The first challenge is simply doing the basic job that a human being currently does. And, that is the job that people increasingly don't want to do, but also the job that human beings are very good at doing, evolutionarily speaking. So it may seem very easy to us to identify a piece of fruit or vegetable and grab it and pick it, but there's so much that goes into that for a robot. You basically have to build a an entire human being in a very narrow band in order to do that task. So just doing that task alone and doing it in a way that addresses all the concerns that a human being can address as they do it is the first challenge. The second challenge, of course, is then building enough robots to do that at a scale that matters to a very large grower or a very large industry. And so where the industry needs to prove itself is that we can manufacture reliable hardware at scale that also can be reliable through the software that we operate on that hardware. And that's a complex problem again. So not only do you have to do the problem at a single robot scale, but now can you build 10, 20, 50, 100, 200 plus that do that job over and over again in a reliable manner. And then the last problem is this integration. It's not just picking a piece of fruit. It's not just having many robots that pick pieces of fruit. It's also, as Dan's alluded to in the video, it's about interacting directly with the grower's operations. If you have a solution that requires a farm to completely upend how they operate, it's going to be much harder for them to adopt. If instead you can do the job and plug into their regular operations, by which I mean literally moving things around, and do that as painlessly as possible, then that's a solution that they need. So the scalability challenge is big, but that's sort of the three tiers of it.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Dan, your thoughts on that one?
So I agree completely with what Eric just described. I think he laid that out pretty well. I would add to that there's good reason to be optimistic within agriculture about the scalability of new solutions. So, you've got a very challenging set of criteria you have to meet. Not only do you have to solve hard problems, but you have to do it in very demanding environments. And when we start harvesting apples in August, it's more than 100 degrees. It's hot. It's dusty. And by the time we finish the season, there's snow on the ground and every weather pattern in between. This year, we've literally been baked in the sun. We've had windstorms black out the sky. We've had smoke storms black out the sky. We've been rained out, and we'll be snowed on within the next month or so. So these are demanding environments for advanced technology. Mm-hmm. However, if you look at the background for both Eric and my both of our background photos, you see some pretty sophisticated innovation, kind of history of innovation within our customer industries. The types of orchard canopies that growers use today using dwarfing trees that are, basically almost like vineyards that are 12 feet tall and incredibly, carefully managed. The horticultural practices and the various types of technologies that feed these types of modern orchards or, the types of greenhouses and systems that Eric's working in are examples of a long, consistent history of innovation. So if you can solve those problems and you can create something that shows real value to a grower, they're receptive to you scaling that solution. Mm-hmm. And so, that's something that I think in the broader technology world, a lot of people sort of maybe misunderstand or mischaracterize agriculture as, not really a technically innovative market. And I think that's, there's a lot of history that shows that's not correct.
Yeah, yeah. Nolan, or Koji, in terms of maybe just taking a different slant on this is a capital intensive, business, capital intensive in terms of investment. And I know traditional venture capitalists don't particularly love, that. What's your sense in terms of the scalability challenge here and how you think it's going to play out? Maybe Nolan.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can look at the capital in maybe two ways. I mean, one, if you start on the grower side, there's a lot of capital there. I mean, Dan, he just talked about, what's in the backgrounds here of with apples and strawberries. Apples, it's taken a lot of money to replant those trees. And if you go to the pack house, a lot of the investment in the packing lines. And so, I think you're seeing significant investment into new tech, whether that's on the production system or from just a pure technology standpoint. And then, I think that certainly ag robotics is more capital intensive than software, but the size of the prize is really big and there's a huge moat. I mean, if you can solve what Dan's trying to do and Eric's trying to do, that's really, really hard. And, so yeah, it may take some, a bit more money to drive the initial sales, But once you've solved that problem, you're in, and you've just cracked a really big nut.
Mm-hmm. Koji?
Yeah, I also try to cover the previous question as well. So I think many players are taking up the challenges of mechanization and automation of each process, including Abandon and Tortuga. And we believe that these solutions will gradually spread as farmers realize that these can solve the labor availability and cost problems which farmers are currently facing. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, when robots reach a level where they can provide added value that can only be created by robots, rather than simply replacing humans, we should see accelerated growth. And as we discussed earlier, I also believe that the advancement of platforms will also drive this expansion. And talking about the scalability, as long as the value provided by robots is simply a replacement for labor, I think that the unique cost will not be high. And to be honest, we think that it is still not so easy to drive scale. So by providing trials to farmers and farmers understand the benefit, these services will be expanded step by step. But on the other hand, if robots are able to provide the added values that can only be created by robots, the unit price could be raised dramatically depending on the value they provide. Yeah. And it is expected to drive scale of the business.
Mm-hmm. Very good. I mean, adoption, is obviously the big thing here in terms of when do you see this in mass adoption, and a lot of this will be linked to what's the business model. You know, are you buying robots? Are you renting robots? Are you paying per apple, per acre? Maybe Dan, talk a little bit about your business model and where do you see, this playing out?
Yeah, sure. So we're coming to market as a service. So we'll own the machines, we'll operate the machines, we'll contract with growers to harvest their crops. I think that's the right way for us to introduce this kind of new capability into the industry. It's also one the industry is quite comfortable with. And so when I talk to growers, the first thing they when I mention the business model, I say we're going to harvest as a service, and they say, okay, it's a custom harvest business, and people have been doing custom harvest for decades. Anytime you have new generation technology, there are going to be issues and adoption curves, and I think those issues are managed more effectively, and the adoption curves are a lot faster when you can offer it as a service instead of as a sale. Mm-hmm. And so we've been talking about this business model for several years with growers in the U.S. and around the world. We've gotten a very positive response, and so that's how we've begun the business. That's the commercial work we're doing today, and that's how we'll begin scaling.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Dan. Eric?
Yeah, I think it's hard to add too much. I mean, the service model really helps to reduce barriers to entry. You're trying to replacing an operating expense with another operating expense, as opposed to making the grower have to consider a capital investment. You're taking away from their mind any concerns about versioning or which edition of this machine am I buying right now versus maybe I should just wait a year. I think the only nuance can come in as you are adding different value-added services that Koji was mentioning. Mm-hmm. Growers are very versed in their economics, their unit economics, their benchmarks, and some of those labor costs or other costs are in different units. So you might have a cost that they measure per acre or hectare and a cost that they measure per kilogram or pound. Mm-hmm. And so as we meet the grower where they are with services beyond just harvest, the plan is to also charge in that vocabulary for them. So a certain service might be per hectare or per linear meter, whereas another service like harvest is per unit of harvest, whether it's a kilogram or a crate or a pound.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Eric. Koji?
Yep.
Any thoughts there on that?
Okay, yeah. Since robotics and automation is still in the introduction stage, the best business model is, I think it is a robot as a service at this moment, which requires little or no initial investment by the farmers. so that the farmers can easily try it out first. This is a business model adopted by many AgTech startups and has become the mainstream business model in this area. On the other hand, as accuracy and reliability of robots are improved in the future, we expect to see some players getting into subscription model or leasing model as well. And maybe software as a service will also become a mainstream once the collected data by robots provides more values to farmers.
Thanks, Koji. Nolan, I mean, in terms of the business model or adoption and also maybe, you know, COVID has kind of, you know, changed the world here. How much do you think this is going to accelerate adoption, you know, in a broad sense in terms of not just in the field, but maybe throughout the supply chain of robotics and automation?
Yeah, I mean, and maybe to start with the first one, I'd agree with what everyone said here. The only questions that I would just raise again would be, you know, whether long-term you want to be in a service business or not. And then the second thing would be, and I'm not sure, this depends by crop, and I'm not sure anyone's really has a great answer yet, is, you know, whether you're going to automate weeding or thinning or harvest or pruning. You've just, you know, you've automated one thing, but that grower still requires a labor force for other things. And so how do you manage that? I think certainly we will, but it's just something, you know, we'll have to think through, and it depends by crop. On COVID, I mean, it's only gonna certainly expedite, I think, the deployment of automation. I mean, we've all read about sort of the processing plants getting shut down. You know, I think I'm always hesitant to say, I mean, whether it's COVID or not, I mean, labor is the biggest problem for these specialty crop growers. It's not going to change. I mean, they need this problem with COVID or without it, but it certainly, I think, won't slow it down.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, in terms of like the future, I know the two guys are going to be very tight-lipped about what their roadmaps are, but, you know, give us a little bit of a glimpse into the future. You know, I mean, obviously we've got a good handle on what you're doing today, but where do you see this, you know, in 3 years or 5 years in terms of maybe not just necessarily your particular roadmap, but, you know, where do you see this, you know, this landing? Maybe Eric. Yeah.
Sure. Just to build on something Nolan just said, I think growers increasingly want more things from you if you can do one thing for them. And so there's sort of the expansion within a crop where you can provide maybe the first entry point of service that is, say, harvest, because it's so critical. And then from what you do or collect in that process, you can provide other services to them that they immediately want. And so that's sort of this expansion within a customer or within a market. And then there's also the idea of, okay, well then can you go do it for another crop? And maybe that crop is similar in its architecture, as Nolan said, or in its agronomy, which maybe is related to that. And so I think what you'll see is you'll see companies that are trying to own a particular crop or market, and then companies that maybe are trying to own a slice of a bunch of different markets. But there's going to be a reckoning at some point where you probably can't do it all for everyone. And what's that going to coalesce into is the big interesting question.
Okay.
Yeah. So the mission that I described earlier, you know, I said the company's mission is automate orchard agriculture. And so, you know, that I think that tells you where we're going to go. So within the next 3 years, you know, job one is to scale apple harvest as a service. And so, you know, that's the most important thing that we'll do. As we do that, we'll look to do a couple of different types of things, and we'll make those decisions, you know, kind of at the appropriate times. But one of them is harvesting other tree fruit crops. And then there are other manually intensive tasks within orchards, and there are other information intensive tasks within orchards, which, you know, our robots will be doing. And so from that standpoint, when I look at specialty crops, you know, like Nolan described, and I look at our subset of specialty crops, which are orchards, you know, if you just take orchard crops, so, you know, roundish fruit growing on trees, farmers get paid about $200 billion a year to grow those crops. And a substantial sum of that $200 billion is being paid to migrant manual agricultural workers. And the pool of those workers has been drying up for decades. It's not a new phenomenon. It's something that growers have seen coming for a long time. And it's driven by demographics and changes in economic changes. And so, that looks like a large and interesting opportunity for us to spend a lot of years, developing and developing automation solutions for. And so, I think we're in the first steps, and I very strongly agree with an earlier comment that Eric made, which is, what he said is, if you do something well for someone, they want you to do more. And I kind of think of it, as you're building a company, you sort of earn the right to take the next step. And so we're earning the right to take the first step by doing a good job in apple harvest, and then we'll earn our, kind of the next steps as we go. But I think we're at the beginning of a wave of automation that, again, there are historical parallels to this. When my grandfather started cotton farming, when he was a teenager, he was literally plowing behind a mule in Louisiana. And, by the time that he finished his career, he was pretty excited about the tractors that he was teaching me to drive, when I was 10 years old. And, I think common practice in these sectors of agriculture, 3, 5, 10 years from now will include this type of automation. And so, I think there's a big gap in productivity that we're well poised to fill. And, there's a lot of work to be done here.
Great, thanks. Koji, Kubota, obviously a very serious player in the world in this space, and you've just landed in Silicon Valley and you're surrounded by specialty crops. Tell us a little bit about the future in terms of maybe how you see this playing out, and where is Kubota pointed?
I see. Okay, thanks. So basically our target in the United States market and the vision of Silicon Valley base is to create an end-to-end service to the farmers specialized for the specialty crop segment. And currently we are working hard to create and having a wide collaboration with the startups. They are doing businesses in this specialty crop segment. And I expect that in the next few years, robotics and automation will be the main replacement for the human labor, as I mentioned earlier. Then in around 5 or 10 years, I predict that the intelligence of robots, in other words, acceleration of advanced solution by connecting with platforms, will make the entire agriculture process more effective and efficient.
Okay. Thanks, Koji. Anything else to add, Nolan? Or I can jump into the Q&A from the audience as well. So,
I mean, I would just add to say something slightly different is that I do think when we go out maybe 5 to 10 years, we're going to see consolidation between. I mean, right now we think of things as like the data and the sensing players, and there's like the robotics players, and they like are in their own lanes. And I think that's going to consolidate in some ways, and in some ways the robotics players may actually become the data players. They can complement it with some of the other sort of sensing technologies, but I think those two lanes, going out 5, 7, 10 years will can converge.
Okay. Thanks, Nolan. So maybe when we go to the Q&A from the audience, and hopefully we can all kind of see the questions. Rod Cook is asking the question, how important is the monetization of the collected data from the field to the investment into the robotics in ag? And as an add-on, is there room to share the value of this data with the grower beyond simply improving their efficiency and providing a lower cost of production? Who wants to take that question? It's a very good question.
So I'll be happy to start.
Yep.
So the first piece is all the plans we're making are about providing direct benefit from day one. So, for harvesting fruit. So, I don't have plans to base a business model on something other than doing a better job of harvesting fruit. So key metrics we're measuring ourselves on today, are we harvesting fruit with the same quality level as hand-picked fruit? And we're actually finding that we are. And can we do it at a cost that's going to be less expensive than what growers have to pay for crews of laborers? And we can. So that's the basis for the business. I do believe there are value-added services or capabilities that come from information that a robot collects while it's doing its work. And, those are opportunities for new products. And the value of those will be determined by how good the products are that we can create and, kind of the value our customers derive from them. Mm. I think most of those are still to be determined. I see some where there's a really clear value proposition and, we know clearly how to deliver that data capability to our growers and they understand sort of what it'll do for them. But I think most of what gets talked about certainly in our field is kind of mostly still to be figured out.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Dan. Anyone else for one comment?
Yeah, I think it depends also by crop. In strawberry or other soft fruits, the data question is more top of mind, I think, because of the harvest profile. So, you may harvest over the course of 2 months or even 6 months, depending on the type of plant. And so the information that you gather as it goes is actually, I think, a lot more valuable. That has a lot more value in the near and sort of more distant future. So there is, I think the question was asked in such a way that do you need to monetize it and is there value for the grower to share? I would flip that around. Our philosophy, and I think the only winning philosophy is you need to create value for growers first, and then you can monetize a part of that value that you create, and then you have to make it work as a business, which is what Dan was referring to. And I completely agree with Dan that if you don't do the first job right, it doesn't really matter how great the data is. But I would say that in some crop types and markets, the data is sort of imminently and immediately valuable. And our mission is to use that data and create value for the grower, and then we can share in that as well. And that, of course, improves the profile of the business from an investment standpoint.
Thanks, Eric. Another upvoted question from Karen Gerhardt, of course. What are the ripest markets for the harvest automation in the world currently? How harvest automation will expand the emerging economies such as Brazil, because she's from Brazil, India, and Southeast Asia? I think Nolan is going to take that one.
Well, that's a good question. And it's very different, I would say, from emerging to developed markets. But certainly when you think about Australia, the US, Europe, those markets are all, huge. And I think, we talk about the different types of growing systems like we see here behind Dan and Eric. Same thing happens between the US and Europe. I mean, you're in Northern Europe and you got a lot of glass house and greenhouse and that's, a huge market with really big crops. And so, I think this labor problem is a problem all across the world. And so that's one. And then in the more developing markets, it's a little more unique, different types of crops and just different types of farmers. Here in the US, much larger farmers, so now, how this model will roll out across, smallholder farmers, is that something that Abundant and a Tortuga can do, or is that going to be something more local and a different type of kind of model? I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Nolan. Anybody else want to give a comment on that one? No.
Really quickly, I mean, some markets we've spoken to growers in, for example, Mexico, who you'd think there's an abundance of labor there, but there's not, and so there's actually more demand for growing because of climate or because of trade dynamics in areas that don't have labor. So even though the minimum wage may be low, they actually have a lack of labor. And so there is space, I think, for automation, even in places that you may not expect.
Okay, thanks, Eric.
Absolutely.
Yeah, another good question from Robert C. To what extent is broadband connectivity and capacity in the farm field a necessary precedent for robotics to be successful. That sounds like a great one. I know Eric and Dan are going to jump in for this one.
Yeah, no, I just assume that it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And actually, the reason isn't kind of as snarky as it might sound. The amount of information that we collect and that we process on a real-time basis would swamp any broadband system. There's fiber to the home will give you a 10 gig connection in a small number of places. That could probably keep up with what we need, but anything short of that, that's why I mentioned earlier that everything has to be sort of hyper locally processed. And then, frankly, for the amounts of data that we want to move off the machine, uploading that over the wireless connections that are available, even a good 4G LTE connection, it takes much too long. So it's going to be a while, and we'll see sort of how long really high bandwidth 5G takes to get out to most remote locations. Mm-hmm. I suspect even by then, the amount of data that we're manipulating and making use of would overwhelm anything that's going to be available remotely.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Eric?
It's the challenge is we have to be flexible to the conditions in the market, right? I mean, we are currently trialing in an area with barely any cell phone receptivity and reception. So you basically need to operate without internet. We also have a deployment active somewhere else that they've already installed fiber internet for all of their workers so that they can watch Netflix at night and have like a better quality of life. So there we actually are consistently and constantly uploading our data basically in real time. All the processing is done on robot, as Dan mentioned, but the logging of all this other information can sort of happen as you go. And so what's important is just to be flexible, but to never expect that you will have, reliable connectivity. And when you do have it, then of course, make as much use of it as you can.
Great. Thanks, Eric.
And by the way, if I could just add, there's one more aspect of networking that turns out to be pretty important and pretty useful, which is more of a local area networking around a farm site or an orchard site. And so being able to move interesting amounts of data around a several acre site is not necessarily trivial with a lot of networking configurations. That is doable these days and turns out to be pretty useful. Mm-hmm. So there's a different type of remote networking that's going to be key to the solutions we're scaling up.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Dan. Last question, Catherine Jacob, do you see an adjustment of plant to robotics, branch growth, branch number, fruit location, etc.? So would plant breeding in the future look at changing physical traits and to adjust to robotics? I think Nolan will have an input in that one.
Nolan will know.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And I mean, we've seen it. Across a lot of these crops. I mean, everything you're seeing here in the backgrounds are due to breeding. We've seen with lettuce, they went to the light bulb lettuce to be able to take a water knife underneath it. And we'll, if you think of what's happened in greenhouse and what those crops look like, certainly breeding to go after plant architecture will be continue to be a big thing. And then just as it relates to harvest, I think the good news is that a lot of the breeders are breeding for it anyway because they're trying to improve the efficiency of manual labor.
Yeah.
And so it's not like in many cases, a whole nother trade. It's just to add on.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. Maybe, Jess, if you can share the polling. And the first question was, how many years until robots are regular workers on the farm at scale? And I think mostly 5 years is kind of the number one, and number two, 10 years. What do you think about that, Koji? Is Kubota going to be earlier?
I think this is in line with our timeline. So I do agree with this answer, and I'm surprised that there's almost no negative feedback for the question number 2.
Yeah.
That is very supportive for us to accelerate our robotics and automation activities.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Yeah, that second question is, how would you feel if you saw at your supermarket that the produce was harvested and moved and packed by a robot, and nobody has, well, 1%, maybe one person has.
I think it's going to be is if the fruit is all bruised, then I think people will have a different response. But if it still looks great or even looks better, then people are going to love it.
Yeah, yeah. Last poll was, would you be willing to pay more if you could see your produce getting harvested by scanning our QR code or trace its journey from the farm? And number one, maybe, and maybe a slight bias towards yes at 32%. So any thoughts on that, guys?
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
I was just going to say it's definitely possible. I mean, we already compile every pick video we have essentially. Whether it's something that can be value accruing to a supermarket or to a customer is another question. I wrote maybe. I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay.
I know for sure that the supply chain is interested in that traceability. I mean, that's not a small thing.
Yeah.
So that's very real.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you how consumers would interact with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, guys, it's been a great conversation. Really enjoyed it. Thank you for everybody for tuning in. I want to thank our panelists for great discussion, and I'm sure it'll be a conversation for quite some time. So thank you, guys.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And maybe just in closing, our upcoming next panel discussion, again, two very exciting areas around controlled environment farming with Mark Ushman from AeroFarms, and then also Impossible Foods, next generation proteins, healthy living, and nutrition has always been top of mind. So it's going to be a really great, conversation. And Chris Ney is head of the food and beverage industry for Wells Fargo. So if you want to tune in for that, we're going to have that in 2 weeks' time, just before Halloween. So again, I'd like to thank everybody for a great day today. Thank you for tuning in. And I want to thank our team, Jess, Helen, Karen, for all the help pulling this together, and look forward to talking to you all in a couple of weeks' time. Take care. Be safe there, everybody.